Tiber Septim. He's something of an enigma to me as well. What is Tiber Septim? Tiber Septim is people. That's what he is. He is window dressing. He is public relations. He is the Empire's attempts at retaining order, and perhaps all of the hyperbole of revolving around their biggest emperors like Revan Cyrodiil, Tiber Septim, maybe even Queen Alicia herself, have all been exaggerated, hyperbolated, in order to retain a sense of divine right to rule. What do we know of Talos Stormcrown? A great many things, from a great many sources, from an even greater amount of unreliable bias soaked into each and every one. Talos is Tiber Septim. Talos is Ismael Wolfarth. Talos is Zorin Arctus. Talos is public relations to an empire ever needing to mold a story that fits the narrative they want the world and their own people to accept. Much like Vivek's sermons contain a great many amount of window dressing to contain the truths hidden within for those who wish to look for it, Talos' story contains just as many secrets as there are falsehoods. What do we know of some of these heresies? Well, one of my favorites, and the one I mostly want to talk about today, is the Arctuarian heresy. And I know it's a very popular one, but I have a theory that I would like to add on to this that I don't see mentioned too much, if at all. The heresy might be written by Zerdoctus itself. That's not the special part. Back when he was known as the Underking during and before the days of Daggerfall is probably when he wrote it. Perhaps we should begin at the beginning. Before there was Tiber Septim, there was Hjalti Earlybeard, a Breton, and Bretons are known to live beyond the ages of 100, maybe not over 150, but 110 to 120 is not unheard of. So Tiber Septim's age of death would fit for being a Breton. He was a nobody by rights, somebody he did become, and all because of another's actions. Another who might be the real Talos Stormcrown, as the name was given to Hjalti because of another's actions. Think of Dune. Think of Muad'Dib. Dune. As in Dune. Right here, this Dune. The Dune of Muad'Dib. Now, this is a big, beefy book, so I'm not going to keep it on the screen, but now you know which Dune I'm talking about at the very least. Tiber Septim's backstory started to be told by the development of Morrowind, although Tiber Septim as a character, he's been here since Arena. We know it because of the Septim Empire, but we didn't really know everything about him until by Morrowind with all of the lore books written. And we know when they were figuring out concepts like the shouts, that they pulled a fair bit from Dune's voice. The Weirding Way, and specifically from David Lynch's film. Perhaps they drew a bit more for the backstory of Skyrim's favorite son. Hjalti was a servant to a warlord, and he was effective, but he wasn't perfect. Until one day, when faced with a pretty big battle against more than a few Nords on the enemy side, suddenly, on that day, Hjalti used shouts, and was surrounded by a storm that the Nords all defected and joined his side once they beheld him. They began to call him Talos Stormcrown, which in their language, in their faith, in their beliefs, it's pretty big kind relations and all that stuff. Almost as if Hjalti was the spitting image of a prophecy that the Nords were all in worship over. Think of the Fremen from Dune. Think of Muad'Dib. Paul Atreides was privy to the prophecy of Muad'Dib, and walked like Muad'Dib, until the Fremen saw him as Muad'Dib. Perhaps Hjalti was visited by Wolfarth, and told of a prophecy Wolfarth had heard atop High Hrothgar, and told Hjalti that he should walk like the prophecy, until the prophecy and him could no longer be told apart, and that Wolfarth would help him achieve this. Wolfarth was High King of Skyrim a very long time ago. He was allegedly at Morinborn. Big actions in the First Era, which would make sense if he is at Morinborn, as that be the only era in which he could have come from, unless he came from the Merethic era, in which case he'd be even older. They say he was a Shezarene, and as you all know at this point, Lorkhan in Shezarenes, he's known as Shezar in Cyrodiil. A Shezarene, an I-N-E at the end, is literally like a reincarnation or an aspect of that deity. Like a Nerevarine is the reincarnation / aspect of Nerevar. A Shezarene is a reincarnation and or aspect of Shezar. In which case, they say Wolfarth was a Shezarene, and you all know about that. If not from me, then certainly from everybody else in this mud pit. They say he could shout a village to pieces. Perhaps he could roar a mountain or two to topple. Very powerful man. He dies, of course, as all humans do, but is then resurrected, at least to some capacity, as the Ash King, or the Under King, to lead the Nords against various dangers, such as an Akaviri invasion, or for the famous Battle of Red Mountain. What happened on that mountain changes depending upon who you ask, so we don't really know the truth. Unreliable narrator, as it were. But if we pick and choose from these various sources, such as the Songs of Wolfarth or the Lessons of Vivec, both contrasting viewpoints, both written by the same person, we can paint some sort of idea of what went on. We know that Dagoth tried to convince the Nords that Shor's heart, Lorkhan's heart, was in Red Mountain, and that the dwarves and the Chimera were going to do some stuff with it, and that the Nords, they didn't like that. They say the Nords literally sang Shor back into the world. They sang him back. They used their Thuum and their voice to call him back from wherever he was, Sovngarde or whatever. They sang him back into the physical living plane. They used this power to bring his ghost here, and they told him where his heart was, and wished to reunite God and heart together. And so Shor breathed Wolfhearth back into the world to lead this army of Nords into battle. And battle was had. Many Titans fought, and many more fell that day. Wolfarth lost in a battle against Nerevar and Vivec. He shouted, and he shouted, and he shouted some more, and Nerevar simply held out his hand, and he plucked the shouts from the air as if they were simply ideas that he found disagreeable. He handed these to Vivec, who placed them in his ebony listening frame, upon which he placed on Wolfarth so that his shouts would resonate back at him. The specifics of this event I will leave vague, as some theories are not suitable for this platform. But if you know Kirkbride, and if you know Vivec, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Needless to say, Wolfarth was enraged after this battle. He was furious. He was humiliated. He left the mountain defeated and desired forevermore vengeance against the Tribunal and its Hortator. And of course, needless to say, this union of Hjalti and Wolfarth would prove to be very beneficial for both parties. And Hjalti would go from humble beginnings to some very ambitious shoes. Perhaps together they spun a tale that he was actually a Nord. Perhaps he spun a tale that his story was infused with Wolfarth's aspects in order to get the Nords more placated on his side, so that he'd verily be worshipped as a living god to them, just as the Tribunal were to the Dunmer. This loyalty won him the land, and it won him Cyrodiil for his lord. And then, mysteriously, Lord Khulakan died. An assassination attempt, it was called. Or was it an assassination full stop? Perhaps the assassin was the one who claimed it was an assassination attempt on his own life. Perhaps Hjalti grew too ambitious and killed his lord so that he would have the seat of Cyrodiil upon which he would build his empire for himself. He had to be very careful about how he was going to spin this yarn. Enter Zurin Arctis, a very powerful mage and a tactician of genius purport. I doubt Hjalti or Wolfarth would have won nearly as many of their victories were it not for him. Perhaps he is the snake tongue that could spew the false truths to get them to be believed as the true truths. Who knows? But together these three would go on to forge a great and mighty empire. And the man who led this army was a lie. Hjalti was no Thuum master. That was Wolfarth. Hjalti was not at Mornborn. That was Wolfarth. Hjalti may have been great in battle, but Wolfarth was greater still. Alone, Hjalti would never conquer Tamriel. I doubt he would have even conquered Skyrim. And he knew this. Because when Wolfarth left him after he forged a peace treaty with Vivec, he gave up on his ambitions of conquering anything else. Such was how much of Talos Wolfarth was. Wolfarth was practically the whole of Talos. Hjalti was just the living man. Zurin was the cunning mage. But Wolfarth was the near deity to give the people the belief that Hjalti was an actual god. In this case, think of Hjalti as Paul. Think of Zurin as Lady Jessica. Think of Wolfarth as Muad'Dib. Paul had to become Muad'Dib in order to win the Fremen. And so Hjalti had to become Wolfarth to become Talos Stormcrown. And who better to weave the tales and be the cunning tactician than Zurin Arctis to meld the lines and blur the stories until neither one could be separated. Enter the Numidium. Vivec offered this as the carrot on the stick to prevent a war between Septim's Empire and Morrowind. I don't know Vivec's thoughts here. Perhaps Wolfarth was part of all of this, and he knew this from the start. Perhaps he knew the play these three were making and was simply curious to see where they'd take it. Perhaps he thought they'd actually destroy Somerset, which would be more than okay with the Dunmer, as they're not too fond of the High Elves. Perhaps he thought Hjalti would never get it to work, period. Needless to say, the Numidium was in Tiber Septim's hands now. Zurin Arctis betrays Wolfarth here, and Hjalti was complicit in this betrayal, as there is no more need for Wolfarth. The people had already believed Hjalti was Talos Stormcrown, and he had already conquered the hardest parts of the world that he needed using the voice. For, with the Numidium, that was all he needed to conquer Somerset. The parts of Wolfarth's story that he needed, he already had in his image. He already walked like Wolfarth on this journey. The Ash King would be needed for only one final task. Zurin attempted to trap Wolfarth within the Mantella so that it could be used in place of Lorkhan's heart so that the Numidium could be powered. Perhaps part of Zurin's soul was trapped within this as well that night. Perhaps in the ensuing struggle, Wolfarth and Zurin both lost parts of themselves within the Mantella, and the Mantella became something of a phylactery for the remains of poor Zurin, who survived this encounter as the new Underking. And Wolfarth? Well, there's nothing left of him but ash after this. All thoughts lead to him being inside the Mantella now. With no Zurin to get cold feet and betray him, and with no Wolfarth to contest his rule, Tiber Septim took the now-powered Numidium and set it to attack Somerset. They surrendered within the hour. They say a dragon break happened then, for a lot of strange things happened after the Numidium conquered Somerset. One of the things that happened was that a wizard, an undead lich, appeared before the Numidium, and after this encounter, both the wizard and the Numidium vanished. The Mantella flung into the sea, or into Aetherius, some say. Either way, they were all gone afterwards. The Underking reappears in Daggerfall before Talos' God story was even concocted by Kirkbride. So the general events of Zurin, Tiber Septim's name, they did exist by this point in Daggerfall. But the finer details, not so wired in. Surin is one of the people you, the player, can give the Mentella to. And upon being given it, Surin reunites with the soul trapped within it, and vanishes. What becomes of him, no one can say. But after the events of this ending, in the next game, in Morrowind, Talos has joined the Pantheon. I've already said how Talos can be an enantiomorph. This is described as one of the 6 walking ways that Vivek mentions in his sermons. These are the ways in which one might achieve apotheosis, or godhood. The events of Wolfarth's betrayal mirror very strangely the events of Lorkhan's betrayal at the hands of Auriel and Trinimac. Remember, Trinimac was Auriel's greatest knight and closest confidant, probably much like Surin was to Hjalti. It was Surin who ripped the heart from Wolfarth, so as to say, with Hjalti perhaps acting as the Auriel to this trinity of betrayal. Manamarco once said, "As above, so below." If you reflect the actions of those above you, then it shall be so below as well. Talos walked like Lorkhan, potentially mantled him in some way, after the Oversoul was forged. We can at least assume it's a gameplay mechanic that Talos, his shrine in Oblivion, gives you a buff like the other Aedric shrines dotting Cyrodiil. But can we say with certainty that Talos truly ascended? Do we know? Has he given us proof? Well, in Morrowind, many believe Talos has an avatar in the game. This NPC is named Wolf, that is, W-U-L-F. Well, to that I would say look at the name Wolf, and remember the name Wolfharth. That is W-U-L-F-H-A-R-T-H. Wolfharth. Perhaps there's more than meets the eye here, and that Talos could be more Wolfarth than Hjalti. Perhaps the Ash King has reconciled Tiber Septim for now, for the greater good, as getting rid of Dagoth is a much bigger fish than petty rivalries. We never see him again, so we can only speculate as to who Wolf was, whether he was an aspect of Wolfarth, or Talos' avatar. The world may never know. Tiber Septim, the person, is people, many actions, all Tiber Septim, all not Tiber Septim. Perhaps mostly propagandized by the Empire for good public image from the outside looking in, and also from those on the inside looking even more in. The Empire could have told you a great many lies in order to keep itself together. Talos could perhaps be the greatest one yet. Tiber Septim's tale, much like Paul Atreides', is a cautionary one. It cautions against the powers of great kings and messianic complexes and the destruction such often bring. I'm not a Dune lore master. I've only watched these 3 film adaptations, and I'm now going through the first book. And I plan to eventually get to the others. But we only need to look at the first one to get an idea of what is happening. The Septim Empire is falling apart. And if the Nords ever learned of what Hjalti did to Wolfarth, if the Arctuarian heresy ever proved to be true, or simply you just need to convince them of it, things would not look good for Cyrodiil at all. Perhaps the elves and men are doomed to fight each other until the end of days, and the ends of days beyond these days. Perhaps Queen Alicia could be proven correct, though. Perhaps her dreams of reconciliation of the 2 warring deities for the peace and prosperity of men and mer alike could be achieved. And it is often the Empire that has embraced these cosmopolitan beliefs, even if the Empire itself was born on a lie. I like the Empire. I sided with them in the Civil War in Skyrim. And I think I may make the next video about why I did that, and why I don't really care for the Stormcloaks at all. Either way, this was my thoughts on Talos, Tiber Septim, and the connections I found between both Tiber Septim's journey and Paul Atreides of Dune. Perhaps there's more here than meets the eye.